When you think of the world's best airlines, United Airlines probably doesn't come to mind. However, United is currently undergoing one of the largest expansions of any airline in the world, with more than 700 planes on order, including over 150 Boeing 787s to expand their long-haul operations. So, if United's going to be an option for a lot more trips soon, the question is, how good is their economy class? Today, we're going to be putting the airline to the test, on board their longest flight, nearly 18 hours in the air, non-stop, from San Francisco to Singapore in economy class, on board a Boeing 787 Dreamliner. My journey today actually began in New York, and I'm currently on my way into San Francisco after a rather uneventful 5-hour flight on board a United 757. After a few hours of sleep, we're landing on a beautiful West Coast morning. San Francisco is a major hub for United and the base of the airline's trans-Pacific operations. Connecting through San Francisco is super easy, both because of the airport's compact layout and because you don't need to re-clear security or pass through immigration when connecting to an international flight from a domestic flight in the US. So I made the quick walk from my arriving plane in the F gates of Terminal 3 to my flight to Singapore in the G gates of the International Terminal in just about 10 minutes. The two terminals are easily connected airside, and even in the morning peak hour, it really isn't too busy here. San Francisco is a really pleasant airport, with lots of light, short walking distances, and some great amenities, including this amazing outdoor terrace at the end of Concourse G with great views of planes on the ramp. San Francisco was recently named America's best airport by Wall Street Journal, and for good reason. I found connecting through here to be just about the easiest international-bound connection I've ever made. After a few minutes of watching planes, it's time for boarding. I only had a scheduled 50-minute connection between flights here, which I was a little worried about, but it turned out to be more than enough thanks to the easy transfer as well as an early arrival. The gate area is super pleasant as well, and we now have a view of my ride for the 18-hour journey to Southeast Asia. This Boeing 787-9, which hasn't been repainted in United's new livery yet, was delivered new to the airline in 2015. Without any further ado, let's get on board. United 787s all feature the airline's Polaris business class cabin, which has gotten surprisingly high marks from travelers, thanks in part to a very comfortable bed. Behind business class is United's premium economy class, which they call Premium Plus, laid out in a 242 configuration, which is followed by the 333 configured economy class with 188 seats spread out across two cabins. The first 5 rows or so of economy class are sold as Economy Plus with 3 or 4 inches of extra legroom. However, I'll be all the way back in regular old economy class today, with seat 48A being my home for the next 18 hours. Each seat features an adjustable headrest, and waiting for every passenger are a blanket and a somewhat strange foldable pillow, which I think is supposed to be used as a neck pillow, but it really isn't fluffy enough to give you any real support. I just use it as a regular pillow, which I found perfectly fine, although it does have one of those scratchy single-use plastic covers, which isn't nearly as comfortable as the cloth pillowcases that some airlines use. Each seat features some surprisingly solid legroom, which measures at 31 inches of pitch, but really felt larger than that, perhaps due to a narrower seat pocket. I'm honestly surprised to see this much legroom on United, so great job here. Each seat features a large, responsive touchscreen with an impressive selection of content that I'll touch more on once we're in the air. Below the screen are headphone and USB ports, and below each seat is a full universal power port, which is great to have, although I think this is basically a requirement on any long-haul flight these days anyways. The tray table is also rather large and quite sturdy. All in all, this is a surprisingly stellar if basic seat, so great job here, United. We pushed back over an hour after boarding, thanks to prevailing wind conditions, which would have meant that we would have landed earlier than our allocated landing slot in Singapore. So in total, I'll be spending over 18 hours on this airplane, which is, a very long time.
Regulations prohibit tampering with, disabling, or destroying mandatory smoke detectors. U.S. law also requires passengers to comply with lighted signs and crew member instructions. Make sure you
departure hour here in San Francisco, which means about a half-hour taxi out to runway 28 left for departure. But hey, if you ask me, that's just more time to enjoy the views of the airplanes. After a stunning takeoff from the Bay Area, we're flying west over the Pacific. Right after departure, a pre-meal snack and drink service was conducted, with a savory snack mix bag being handed out alongside a drink of your choice. One cool thing about United that I really haven't seen elsewhere is that they consistently hand out full-sized cans of drinks instead of the little airplane-sized cans of soda or juice that you'd normally get, which is pretty awesome. After the snack, a full lunch service was conducted. As is common with US Airlines, the choice was just a verbal chicken or pasta, and I went with the chicken, which to my surprise turned out to be a butter chicken with cilantro rice. The chicken was served alongside a barley salad and a bread roll with butter, as well as a small packaged cookie for dessert. The butter chicken itself was actually surprisingly tasty, if on the smaller side. I've heard a lot of bad things about United's food, so this was a really positive surprise. The barley salad was okay too, although I feel like the packaged cookie was a little uninspired. United uses plastic cutlery, which is of course inferior to the metal cutlery some airlines give out in economy, so perhaps there's some room for improvement here. Overall though, I feel like this is a surprisingly good meal service. In fact, the crew even handed out these little water bottles after the service, which surprised me and was great to see. However, I would soon find out that this was the last meal service until just prior to landing, nearly 14 hours later, which is just quite frankly ridiculous. This meal was served at 1 p.m. San Francisco time, and the next meal, which you'll see later, wasn't served until 3 o'clock in the morning in San Francisco, which makes no sense at all. I'm totally fine with having only 2 meal services on this flight. After all, planes don't even really have the capacity to hold more than that in the galleys anyways. But I fundamentally don't understand why you wouldn't serve the next meal at dinner time in San Francisco when everyone was both awake and hungry. Either way, this was it. There weren't even any snacks available throughout the flight in the galleys either, as most airlines do on ultra-long-haul flights. It's not all that often that I get noticeably hungry during a flight, but on this one I did, because as good as this butter chicken was, not having anything substantial for the next 14 hours is really just unacceptable. As we flew west over the Pacific, I caught some sleep. The provided blanket is unfortunately rather thin, and United keeps their planes pretty cold too, so I got pretty chilly. Thankfully, the middle seat was empty, so I was able to steal another blanket from there, but this is certainly another pretty simple place that United could target for improvement. About halfway through the flight, and right around dinner time in San Francisco, a small snack was handed out, consisting of a pack of M&Ms and a rather sad cheese sandwich, which had a single slice of ham and cheese surrounded by some white bread. To be frank, this really just is not enough for a flight this long. Drinks were handed out too, and the crew did do a really good job of handing out drinks throughout the flight, but this just is not enough food if you ask me, especially considering that there isn't even any snacks available except for those savory snack mixes you saw earlier, which I really started to get sick of by hour 14 or so. One thing that I certainly won't complain about, though, is the in-flight entertainment system, which United calls private screening. On board are thousands of movies and TV shows with lots of recent hits, as well as an excellent selection of older movies, plus full seasons of dozens of TV shows, which are a really good way to pass time in my view. The system was also really simple and easy to navigate. It featured a nice interactive moving map, and it even had a really impressive selection of podcasts, sleep mixes, music, and even live news headlines. This is one of the best systems I've seen out there, and I'm not really sure why it isn't talked about more. I'd also like to point out that United's entire domestic fleet is also being fitted with these screens. So this really awesome selection will soon be available to every United passenger on every United flight, which is really, really awesome. So as the flight went on, I watched some movies and TV, slept a good amount, and watched the Pacific go by as the sun slowly set over the world's largest ocean and the islands of the Philippines. The lavatories on board are nice and were kept clean throughout the flight by the crew, who I found to vary in quality, with some super outgoing, friendly flight attendants, as well as some flight attendants who felt like they'd rather be somewhere else. Overall, the service was mostly a net positive though, and the flight attendant who I interacted most with was awesome throughout the flight. With about an hour and a half to go before our landing in Singapore, a second hot meal service was conducted, which for some reason was breakfast? At this point, it's about 7 p.m. in Singapore, so right around dinner time, and it's about 3 a.m. in San Francisco, so clearly not breakfast yet. And we were last served lunch, so you'd think dinner would be the next meal, but no, we got a choice between eggs and waffles. I'm not really sure why the airline would go out of its way to serve what is notoriously the hardest meal to get right on an airplane, but c'est la vie. I went for the waffles, which certainly tasted better than they looked, although that's not saying much. The portion size felt really small, particularly after the 14 hours we've been waiting since our last meal. I tried to reorient the food a bit to make the portion look a little bigger than the way it was served to me, but that doesn't really make up for the lack of size. However, a sweet waffle wasn't really what I was in the mood for at this point anyways. The meal was served alongside some fruit and a croissant with some butter, but again, that's about it. I wouldn't say that anything tasted explicitly bad here, but this wasn't an impressive service either, especially for a flight this long after that long a wait since our last meal. Nonetheless, we're soon on approach into Singapore. So, would I call United Airlines economy class good? Well, no. But I do think that United does a lot of things right, and that they can be worth it to fly if the price is right, especially if the airline improves their soft product in a couple of relatively easy ways. I actually think that the hard product of this aircraft, the seats themselves, are actually quite competitive. The seats are comfortable and well padded, the legroom is surprisingly stellar, and the in-flight entertainment system on board is outstanding. Plus, United's San Francisco hub is a bliss to transfer through. If that's what you care about, United is totally fine. The food on board, though, was of mixed quality. The butter chicken for lunch was actually pretty good, but it was all downhill from there. Most notably, the incredibly odd decision to not serve another full meal 14 hours straight is just outrageous. Like, I have no idea why it's done this way at all. Meanwhile, the food quality of that second meal, the breakfast, wasn't the best, and serving breakfast at all on a flight that departs at noon and lands at 8 p.m. is nonsensical anyways. Combined with the lack of literally any snacks available on board mid-flight and the rather sad sandwich, I just don't understand what United's doing with its catering here. There's a few other places where small things could be made better. The pillow and blanket, for example, could use some improvement, and the crew were fine overall, but they varied a bit in friendliness. However, I do really think that United has the opportunity to create a competitive product here. If they just picked up their food game and got thicker blankets, this would be a very solidly good flight. And given the amount that United will soon be expanding, I do really think that they have the chance to do just that. Meanwhile, I want to point out that this flight was just outrageously cheap. I paid just under $1,000 for a round-trip fare from Singapore to New York and back during the peak winter holiday season, and I booked just 2 weeks in advance. Basically, every other airline in the world was trying to charge at least double what I paid on United. So, considering what I paid, I have to say that United's long-haul economy class is, despite its faults, totally survivable. And if you're saving enough money, I think it's worth it, especially if they make a couple small improvements. And with that, we're in Singapore 18 quick hours later. Thank you so much for watching this video. Please like, comment, and subscribe. And as always, I look forward to seeing you all in the sky very soon.